Hey students, today we're going to be looking at the Act 2 terms for Romeo and Juliet. For these terms, what you need to do is make sure your booklet's out, make sure your booklet's open to page 18, and I'm going to be running through a bunch of the, not all of them, but a bunch of the literary terms there on page 18. I need you to make sure you write these terms in your booklet because you'll be able to use your booklet later when you take your on-campus assessment today. Reminder, don't take the on-campus assessment until you've taken the Pearson quiz. If you look through the topic board today and read the directions for today's lesson, the first thing you do is do the Pearson quiz on Act 1. That's the first thing you do. And then the next thing you're going to do after you watch this YouTube video, of course, is you're going to take the on-campus quiz too. That one's going to be really simple, especially if you fill your booklet out right now. All right, let's go through it, people. First of all, these four terms, we're going to go through them kind of quickly, and I'm going to give you an example of each one from Act 1. You might want to pay attention to the example and jot it down. That could show up on the quiz. First one's analogy. Analogy is when you compare two things, especially to kind of give an example of something. You compare two things to kind of express a thought a bit more. One example of this would be when Benvolio's talking to Romeo about Rosalind, and he says, "Compare her face to some that I will show, and I will make thee think thy swan a crow." He's comparing Rosalind and Romeo's love for Rosalind to a swan and a crow. And he's like, man, if you look at your little swan, Rosalind, the beautiful bird that you love, look at some other girls, and I'm going to make Rosalind, a swan, look like just a regular old ordinary girl, a crow. That's an analogy. Next one's an oxymoron. An oxymoron is a figure of speech with two contradictory terms that are used right next to each other. An example in this one is, again, Romeo talking about his initial love, Rosalind, and he talks about how love can be so tough on him. He says Rosalind, his love for Rosalind is a brawling love. Love usually doesn't fight like that. Or a loving hate. Two words that are exact opposite used together to make a point. Next one is a monologue. A monologue is something that's going to happen in plays a lot, especially plays from Shakespeare. And a monologue is one character giving this long speech, usually to express some emotions, and a lot of times that long speech is in front of other characters. One good example from Act 1 would be Mercutio's Queen Mab's speech. It's super long, he's talking about lots of stuff, and it's in front of other characters. The final one is called a soliloquy. And a soliloquy is one character that's telling their personal thoughts all by themselves. There's not a great example of this one in Act 1, but when Act 2 has a really great example of this when Juliet is standing up on the balcony talking to herself about how she feels about her love Romeo. All right, and then last but not least, class, we're going to take a look at these three different kinds of irony. The first one's dramatic irony, when characters are doing something when the audience knows the opposite is actually true. Okay, so one example here is Romeo and Juliet. They are kissing and they're like falling in love in Act 1, and we all know that they're enemies, but they don't. That's dramatic irony. Situational irony is a character acts expecting something, but the opposite of what they want actually happens. Perfect example of Act 1 in this one is Lord Capulet. He throws this party to put Juliet and Paris together. That's what he wants. What he doesn't realize is his party actually puts Romeo and Juliet together. And then our last one's verbal irony. A character says one thing and actually means something else. Sometimes this is sarcasm. Think about the very first scene of Romeo and Juliet when you have Samson saying, "I'm not biting my thumb at you. I don't want to quarrel with you." But in reality, he really is biting his thumb, and he really does want to quarrel. All right, that's everything, guys. Make sure you got it copied in. Talk to you later.